Hi everyone, thanks very much for the introduction. This is Liz Mossop speaking here. I've never done one of these before, so please excuse me if anything goes wrong. We've just had a little practice with getting the slides started, and in a minute I'll try and do that again once I get the screen handed over to me, which I... Lovely, right, super.
Hopefully,
now
Liz,
then.
you should...
Yes. Good, can you see that now?
Yes, that's perfect, Liz.
Great. Okay, sorry, it's on the wrong screen, so you're going to get my pop-up bar, I'm afraid, which is a little bit annoying, but I can't see a way around it, so we'll just have to bear with it. Okay, well, thanks very much for the invitation today to speak about PebblePad. I spend a lot of my time talking about PebblePad, much to PebblePad's interest, but we've used it for a long time here at the vet school, and it's something that we've sort of developed and adapted and made work for us, and we have had quite a lot of success with using it with our students, despite the fact that at times, as with any technology, things do go wrong. So it's great to have this opportunity to talk a bit more about it. Just to give you an idea about where we are and what we do, I think we're all potentially a little bit of international participants on the webinar today, but I'm, as was said in my introduction, a sub-dean for teaching, learning and assessment. So basically I look after the teaching and the assessment at our vet school, which you can see pictured here. We're very lucky, we have a beautiful green campus. We're a relatively new school, so we opened in 2006, and we've always had a portfolio. We started with a paper system and we advanced to PebblePad quite some years ago. And our students spend 5 years with us learning to become veterinary surgeons. So what I'm going to talk about today is just touch very slightly, not very much, you'll be pleased to know, about the literature and kind of what it tells us portfolios should do for us, and particularly because the focus today is on feedback and how portfolios can help to facilitate that. I'll show you a little bit about how we use PebblePad here at Nottingham, and then talk a bit about why feedback is absolutely crucial to our success, and then a little bit about lessons learnt. I'm hoping someone's going to give me an indication of the time, because I've just realised that by sharing that screen I have no idea at all what time it is, so hopefully somebody will let me know when I'm getting near to the end of the time and I don't eat into Christine's moment of glory. So this is just a bit of a background really as to why we developed a portfolio. Just like any clinical curriculum, I guess training vets is one of those things where there's lots to fit into a very, very busy curriculum. There's loads of learning activities the students take part in, and particularly on our course it's a very practical, hands-on way of training veterinary surgeons. So they're always out doing things. We also have a lot of placement requirements, which all vet schools have, so our students carry out placements firstly on farms and then later on at veterinary surgeries throughout the country. So capturing this learning and getting students to write and record this learning is very challenging. It's something that they don't particularly want to do, because they sort of sometimes see the placements as something they have to do. They enjoy them, but they don't particularly want to write about them. And so making that happen is challenging. The other reason why we have a portfolio is around the reflective skills and how important they are for veterinary surgeons. So obviously we talk about professionalism to the students, and reflection is a skill that's essential to their development as a professional. So we use the portfolio to try and aid their development of this skill, and this is really where the feedback is so important. So the portfolio is there to record everything they do, hopefully, and we have a structure by which they do that, and then also to develop their reflective skills over the 5 years that they're with us. So just a word, and I used a slide a few weeks ago when I was talking to some colleagues in Australia, and we were trying to discuss where portfolios can sit on this sort of continuum, if you like. I always talk about our portfolios and say, well, what we're not trying to do is objectify things that aren't objective. So, it's very difficult. There's lots of controversy about the assessment of portfolios, but we do use them as an objective assessment method. But at the same time, we want it to be a very student-centered tool. We want them to use it the way they feel is appropriate. So it is a difficult thing, and we fit somewhere along this line, as I'm sure all of those you who are using portfolios do as well. So, it's perfectly possible to have a portfolio that is just a skills checklist where the students just move through and tick off things they've done. That's not what we have here. Of course, at the other end of that, you could have a portfolio that's just free reflection and not really very much structure at all to it. Again, if it's a checklist, it's very teacher centered. It's very much tell us you've done these things, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's the end of it. By making the portfolio a little bit more student centered, more learner centered, and encouraging them to do and talk about things that they want to talk about, that's obviously moving along that way of the continuum. Equally, of course, when it comes to clinical curricula particularly, or any kind of professional type curriculum where we are having to assess their skills, we do need to show some kind of reliability when it comes to assessments. So whilst a teacher-centred skills checklist would be very reliable and accurate to assess, of course we often end up heading towards the other end of the continuum because we're trying to develop this student-centred tool, and then inevitably sometimes our assessment, particularly of reflective writing, can become less reliable, which of course is something we do have to tackle because we have to try and make it as reliable and as sort of accountable to our professional bodies as we possibly can be. So that can be a challenge. So I'm not quite sure where we sit on this continuum. I think we're somewhere towards the right, not quite over to the right, but we definitely, it's just a way that I like to discuss it with different people. Apologies for this slide, it's a little bit busy, but this was just some examples of positives and negatives about portfolios, and really the area that we're focusing on today is around at the bottom here around how you use portfolios. So you can use them both formatively and summatively, of course, and they may be better as formative tools because, of course, as a formative tool we can give the students a lot of ongoing feedback about their reflective skills, about what they're doing, and really help to sort of develop them as professionals. Of course, we actually use ours as a formative and a summative tool, a little bit bizarre. So, it's trying to create that balance and make sure we're sitting in the right place on the continuum of portfolio implementation, if you like. There's some other things as well here that are useful to think about when you are considering implementing a portfolio. I guess one of the interesting ones for us at the moment is around employability. This is becoming more of a hot topic in our world. It didn't used to be, but it is now. Jobs are fewer and further between, and so actually for our students, having a portfolio to demonstrate some of their skills could be something that they see as really useful. And up here about developing reflective skills, of course that's where the feedback comes into things in it to a large extent. So just a little bit more about how we've ended up using PebblePad the way we use it at the moment. As I said, when we opened the school, we originally had a paper portfolio, which was a really straightforward way of students recording what they'd done. They actually collected a series of witness statements and wrote some reflections. They had have a skills diary as well to talk about different things they're doing out on placements and things they're doing in the school as well. We then progressed a few years ago onto the old PebblePad. And we actually did this as a result of a student-led project. So we handed this over to the students and said, what system would you like? We gave them a number to trial, and they fed back that they wanted to use PebblePad. So we obviously adapted it to fit what we want to do. We reduced the number of things we were asking them to produce because we felt it was a bit too much to what we were asking them to do, and ran that fairly successfully for a number of years. We then moved on when the upgrade came out a couple of years ago to Pebble Plus, and that's allowed us to do quite a few new things using some checklisting to make sure they're sort of getting the items that we need them to get into their portfolio, and it's really moved on, how we use the portfolio overall. So this is the way our students use the portfolio, and this is pretty essential to understand where feedback fits in. So basically the students have a learning experience of some kind. It can be something that happens on a placement, so they might be off on a farm or on a stables handling animals, or later on having clinical experiences. We also encourage them to reflect on extracurricular activities, so if they're involved in team sports or anything like that, that can be useful for them to talk about in their portfolio. Anything really they feel is relevant and can be linked into the learning outcomes we give them. So they record that in their portfolio. They then can add evidence to that if they wish to. So they might put photographs in, they might put videos in, they might put in documents that they've picked up which are appropriate to include. And then once they've created an asset that they're happy with, they share that with their tutor, and their tutor is a pastoral tutor who hopefully will give them some feedback on what they've created. And this goes on throughout the year, and then at the end of the year they put all their assets together, and we only ask for 10 assets plus one action plan, and we submit these to the Atlas workspace for a summative assessment point. So that happens at the end of each year, and this is the way we kind of balance our formative with our summative feedback. A bit more about that in a second. So the way we use PebblePad, we use mostly the students use the sort of generic templates that are already in there. So typically experience, reflection, and then we have some bespoke ones we've created and shared for their use. So case studies, for example, when they're in the clinical years, action plans as well. We've also created an asset which allows them to link their the assets that they create into sort of like a checklist. So the students have access to this. They again have it in their portfolio in the assets store, and that's one of the assets that we ask them to submit at the end of the year so that we can see how they're getting on. First through third year, they have a checklist of the learning outcomes for those 3 years of the course, but then fourth and final year we actually give them our day one competencies, which are the Royal College, our Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. They're what they say a day one competent veterinary surgeon should be able to do. So the students have this list of competencies, and they basically have to produce assets that show they've covered all these things and demonstrate their own competency. So they put all that together in a webfolio at the end of each year, and obviously by the end of fifth year it's quite a large webfolio, and everything's in there from fourth and fifth year, and it includes sort of all their clinical experiences and all that kind of thing. So the way that we assess this is in years 1 to 4 we really use this idea of it sort of being a conscientiousness index. So they pass by submitting 10 assets plus an action plan. Now you might think this is very easy and they're all going to pass, but believe it or not, every year we have some students who can't read instructions and can't manage to achieve this, or miss the deadline, or whatever it is they've done. So this has proved over the years to be a very good flag for us of students who perhaps aren't paying completely the right amount of attention to processes and things that we require them to do as undergraduates. So it might seem easy, and generally it is, but actually it's a useful thing for us to look at. So throughout the year they get ongoing comments and formative feedback from their tutor, and then at the end of the year when they submit their webfolio they get some formal qualitative feedback, so more descriptive feedback, probably a little bit more detailed than what they've had from their tutor to some extent, sort of general comments on certain aspects of their reflective skills and things like that. And then they also get obviously a pass or a fail, or they can also get an outstanding, and we have some prizes as well every year for the best portfolio, so that helps too. Effectively, this means they're getting 4 years of formative feedback, because of course they're getting this every year, and for most of them it's easy to pass. It's the feedback that's the important thing. And then at the end of year 5 this becomes a very high stakes assessment, so they've had 4 years of training. Year 5 it becomes 20% of their finals, so by this point we hope that their reflective skills, their ability to complete something like this are pretty good, and so we say, right, we're actually going to give you a mark this year. And so of course assessment drives learning, as we all know, so it really does make them focus their minds and concentrate on it, and they find it a very useful thing to use in year 5. Interestingly enough, the work we've done shows that while they're in the moment and actually doing the portfolio, they do obviously find it a bit of a hassle, which we all do when we're asked to do these things. But when we ask them 6 months out into practice, when they're qualified, what did you think of the portfolio? They're a lot more positive about it, and they can reflect back and see the benefits of recording the kind of activities they were doing. So it's quite an interesting concept there. So what we get from them is of course massively variable, and as I've already mentioned, it gets much better during years 4 and 5, funnily enough, when they're getting a mark at the end of year 5, and of course it becomes gradually more clinical as they move through the different stages of the course. They get much better at reflection through time. 4 years of feedback and they do start to get it. It's a crucial part of their development, and often you do get students who you just think they're never going to understand this, and actually by the time they get to year 5 they're doing a really great job of writing reflectively. It is something you need to work at. We're not all naturally good at it, so it's something that we really try and develop in them. And yeah, our examiners are always very positive about the system. So just a couple of screenshots of what the sort of thing students would present to us. So this is the asset they use to show the different competencies they've achieved. So this is a final year portfolio. What she's done here is listed all her. So we've given her this asset that lists out all the day one competencies, and then she's linked in, you can see next to the rosette, she's linked in the number of assets that relate to that day one competency. And on the left, because this is a web folio, you can see the other pages she's got in there. So she's got a page that lists all her assets from year 4, from year 5, and then the assets she's selected to be examined in her Viva. They do make them look quite nice and pretty as well, which is always good. This would just be an example of a case study type thing. So obviously they're vet students, so they're writing about what they've seen out in practice. This is the template we give them that allows them to record cases, which is very useful for revision when they come to revision. And then of course they can produce anything they like. So this student has produced an asset talking about worming dogs, because obviously it's something she felt she wanted to write about. It would help focus her mind and her understand how to do that. And then, of course, they do write some quite personal, close, reflective assets as well. So often they'll concentrate on challenging ethical situations, or difficult situations they've seen in practice where clients have been challenging or the vet has found something very difficult. So in this case, the student's reflecting on a euthanasia case she's seen. And again, the sort of dialogue that goes on between tutors and tutees around these assets is really quite useful for the students. And I think sometimes it's quite nice for them to be able to write about these things in a private area, but then something that they can choose to share with their tutor as well, should they wish to. So just a bit more about the role of feedback. I guess I found this quote when I was preparing these slides, and I thought, well, it's quite relevant really. This is, I guess, what we're trying to achieve, a continuous dialogue with a cyclical assessment process. So going on and developing this relationship with our students throughout the 5 years. It is most definitely a balance. So, we want to give them lots of formative assessment and feedback, as well as having to assess them summatively to make sure they're progressing in the right direction. But we hope that we have just about achieved that with the way we use the system. And this does, the sharing of assets and this sort of dialogue that goes on through PebblePad is pretty central really to tutor-tutee relationships. You often pick up things about them that you didn't know before, and it helps you to develop that sort of quite personal interaction with them, which I think is very helpful to them as they go through the course. And however, there's always a bit of a however at the end of things like this. Not all tutors are, of course, as good as each other, and we do struggle with them all giving good feedback. We train tutors obviously to try and improve their feedback skills, but often we find when we run these training courses, the good tutors who we know give good feedback turn up for them, and the people who we know are struggling don't bother coming. So it is a hard thing, and many of us actually would struggle to write reflectively the way our students write, and so it can be difficult to assess this in a student if it's something you can't achieve yourself. So we do have to deliver training, particularly for our summative assessors. And of course, this has also led to issues because we are using this as a summative assessment in year 5. If you've got a very good tutor and you get lots of feedback, then obviously it seems a bit unfair compared to a student who perhaps doesn't get as much feedback from their tutor. And so we've had to do some other activities to help with this. So we have a feedback amnesty twice a year where the students can submit assets to a workspace for feedback from people who we know give good feedback. So that makes sure that they do get some feedback if they want it. But it's frustrating, but it's human nature, and inevitably some of us are better at some things than others. So just to finish, and I think I'm just about on time, a little bit about the lessons we've learnt. I guess the most important thing that I would say to anybody, and I'm sure those of you who use PebblePad at the moment will be familiar with this, students and tutors can never have as much support as they need with portfolios. I produce no end of information for students and for tutors. So we have, screencasts, we have handbooks, we have all sorts of different sources of information they can go to. We also have a system of portfolio reps. So I train student reps in each year to give extra support to their peers, which is incredibly helpful. So there's lots of different things we do. There's a picture of a rhino here because I always say in order to run a portfolio system you need to have a skin as thick as a rhino's, because you do get some abuse at times, it has to be said, when you're the one in charge. So yes, just a slight health warning there. But certainly I do think the feedback that the students get through the portfolio system is pretty central to the success of it. And as I say, it's a two-way thing, because it helps students develop that relationship with their tutor, and equally, it's good for the students to get the feedback from their tutor. So that is definitely a good thing. The one thing I would say is to be very clear about what you're trying to do with your portfolio system. So I think we have very clear aims and objectives with it, and that helps everybody to understand why it's there. We see students developing really well these skills we want to develop, so we know it's working, but you need to be clear on that with your students. Don't just have it for the sake of having it because it looks fancy and it sounds nice. You need to know what you're trying to achieve with it, and also, of course, for us, we've really thought hard about the role of assessment within the portfolio and getting this balance right between formative and summative assessment, and where feedback sits in that system. And of course, this concept of feed forward, so they're receiving feedback, but it's actually helping them to be better for the next time around. And as I say, we do think it works very well from that perspective. So back on the dog to finish. I know we're not having questions or comments now, so I'm going to try and press the right button and stop sharing my screen, and hopefully you'll be back with PebblePad. Hang on one second.